Today, we're diving deep into the life and thought of one of Christianity's most influential figures, Saint Augustine of Hippo. So buckle up, because this North African bishop's story is a wild ride of passion, intellect, and spiritual transformation that will make even the most dramatic reality TV show look tame in comparison. So Augustine was born in 354 AD in Thagaste. It's a small town in what we would now call Algeria. His father was a pagan local official, while his mother was a devout Christian. That's some serious family trauma. And so young Augustine, he was a bright kid, and he had a knack for rhetoric and philosophy. And his parents saw his potential, and so they scraped together enough money to send him to some of the best schools. But like many college students today, Augustine found himself more interested in partying than studying. He famously prayed, "Lord, make me chaste, sexually pure, but not yet." During this time, Augustine fell in with a group called the Manichaeans. It's a religious sect that believed in a cosmic battle between good and evil. And he was drawn to their seemingly sophisticated answers to life's big questions. Little did he know this detour would last almost a decade. So fast forward to 386 AD. Augustine is now a successful rhetoric professor in Milan. But he was experiencing a major existential crisis. He knew something was missing in his life, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. One day he's sitting in a garden, and he heard a child's voice saying, "Take and read." He picked up a nearby Bible, opened it randomly, and read a passage from Romans that spoke directly to his struggles with lust and worldly desires. And this moment, it hits Augustine like a ton of bricks. He realized that the answer to his restlessness wasn't going to be found in philosophy, it wasn't going to be found in worldly success, it wasn't even going to be found in romantic relationships, but it was going to be in a personal relationship with God through Jesus. Talk about a plot twist. After his conversion, Augustine wrote the Confessions, and it's a brutally honest account of his spiritual journey. And this wasn't just an old memoir, it was a conversation with God that pretty much laid bare all of Augustine's flaws, his doubts, his struggles. And in an age of carefully curated social media profiles, honestly, Augustine's raw honesty is seriously refreshing. And one of the most famous quotes from the Confessions, it goes like this: "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." And this idea of the restless heart, it became a cornerstone of Augustine's theology. He argued that humans are hardwired to seek fulfillment in God, and that nothing else, not money, power, or even romantic love, can truly satisfy us. Now fast forward a bit, Rome falls. This is 410 AD, and it sends shockwaves through the empire. And many blamed Christianity for what they said they were weakening. Christianity weakened Rome's resolve and strength. Now at this point, Augustine is the Bishop of Hippo, and he wasn't about to let that slide. So he wrote The City of God. It is a massive work that contrasts the earthly city, represented by Rome, with the heavenly city, the kingdom of God. And Augustine argued that true peace and justice could only be found in the city of God, not in an earthly empire. Now, this was a radical idea at the time because he was challenging the notion that Rome was divinely ordained to rule the world. It's like Augustine was saying, "Sorry, Rome, you're not all that and a bag of chips. There's a higher kingdom we should be aspiring to." So let's break down some of Augustine's key theological contributions. And trust me, these ideas have had a massive impact on Christian thought for centuries. So the first is original sin. So Augustine developed the concept of original sin, arguing that all humans inherit a sinful nature from Adam and Eve. That it isn't just about blaming our ancestors for our problems, it's about recognizing, for Augustine, our inherent need for God's grace. Second was divine grace. Speaking of grace, Augustine emphasized that salvation comes through God's grace alone. It's not through our efforts, it's not through our own doings. And this idea would massively influence the Protestant Reformation with reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin. 3 is predestination. Augustine believed that God chose some people for salvation. Many kind of see Augustine as kind of a precursor to Calvinism. And as you can imagine, this controversial doctrine has sparked heated debates for centuries. It's the theological equivalent of the chicken or the egg question. And then just war theory. While Augustine preferred peace, he developed a criteria for when war might be morally justified. His ideas, they still influence discussions on military ethics today. And then the Trinity. Augustine's work on the Trinity really helped clarify this complex doctrine. He used analogies like memory, understanding, and will to explain the three persons of the Trinity. Now, Augustine wasn't afraid to put on his gloves and get in the ring. He didn't just write philosophical treatises, he was also engaged in some serious theological throwdowns with various heretical groups. The first is the Manichaeans. Remember those folks Augustine was hanging out with in his youth? Well, he later writes extensively against their dualistic worldview, arguing for the goodness of God's creations. And then the Donatists, this group believed that sacraments performed by impure priests were invalid. Augustine argued that the effectiveness of a sacrament depends on God's grace, not on human merit. And then maybe the one he's most known for, the Pelagians. Pelagius taught that humans could achieve salvation through their own efforts. And Augustine countered with his emphasis on divine grace and human inability to save ourselves. Now, what we tend to forget is that these debates, they weren't academic exercises. They shaped Orthodox Christian doctrine for centuries to come. This is what makes Augustine so significant. So Augustine died in 430 AD as the Vandals were besieging his city of Hippo. But his influence, it lives on way after his death. So here are just a few ways Augustine's ideas have impacted Western thought. First, medieval theology. Augustine's work, it becomes a foundation for medieval Christian philosophy and theology. Scholastics like Thomas Aquinas, they build on Augustine's ideas. Second, Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk, and both he and John Calvin were deeply influenced by Augustine's teachings on grace and predestination. And then modern philosophy. His introspective approach in the Confessions, it influences later philosophers like Descartes. His exploration of time and memory of the Confessions, it's still studied by philosophers today. And then psychology. Some scholars, they see Augustine as kind of a proto-psychologist, especially in his analysis of memory and the unconscious mind. And then political theory. Augustine's two cities concept has influenced Christian political thought for centuries, shaping ideas about the relationship between the church and state. So Augustine for today, why does he still matter? Like, why should we care about a guy who lived over 1,500 years ago? And here are a few reasons why I think Augustine's thought is still relevant for us today. The first is the search for meaning. We live in an age of materialism, consumerism, and Augustine's idea of the restless heart reminds us that fulfillment, it's not going to be found in stuff or status. Two is grace in a performance-driven world. Augustine's emphasis on God's grace, it offers a refreshing alternative to the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality of our culture. Three, nuanced thinking. In a world of hot takes and polarized opinions, Augustine models how to engage with complex ideas and hold seemingly contradictory truths in tension. Four, intellectual humility. Despite his brilliance, Augustine was always aware of the limits of human knowledge. His famous phrase, faith seeking understanding, it encourages us to approach theology or philosophy with both conviction and humility. And then five, personal transformation. Augustine's dramatic conversion story reminds us that no one is beyond the reach of God's grace and that radical personal change is possible. So as we come to the end of our whirlwind tour through Augustine's life and thought, it's clear that this North African bishop, he left an indelible mark on Christian theology and Western civilization as a whole. From his brutally honest autobiography to his profound reflections on grace, sin, and the human condition, Augustine continues to challenge and inspire readers today. So, next time you feel that restlessness in your soul or find yourself pondering life's big questions, remember old Augustine. His journey from a wayward youth to a pillar of the church, it reminds us that the path to truth is often winding, but always worth the pursuit. And hey, if a party-loving, philosophically confused young man can become one of the greatest theologians in Christian history, there's hope for all of us. So keep seeking, keep questioning. Remember, our hearts are restless until they rest in God.